York, and he dies. And his son, who is the garrison commander, also called Constantius, is proclaimed by the army as Augustus, as the new emperor. Constantine the Great becomes Constantine the Great in York. We don't quite know where, but quite likely where the cathedral now sits. And there's a statue of Constantine out there. And he, of course, he was great in all sorts of ways. But there is one particular way he was very significant for us who are Christians. You'll know the story, I'm sure. It was in 312, March 28th, he has a vision of the cross of Christ in the sky, and over it, in Greek, the words, "in this conquer." And he starts to change. He becomes the first Roman emperor to allow what we would call religious toleration or religious liberty. In 313, the Edict of Milan proclaims that and starts a journey eventually towards Christianity becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. In 314, there is a council of the church. All the bishops of the church gather in Arles, in this instance, in southwest France, and they kept good records, and we know from the records 3 bishops attended from Britain, one of whom was based in Iberacum. So by 314, we've got Christianity alive and kicking with a bishop in York. But we rapidly then hit the period of time we call the Dark Ages. By 410, the Roman armies are recalled to try and prop up the failing city of Rome. The empire is no more. And as Roman civilization begins to decline, Christianity diminishes in Britain, and it's an age of illiteracy, so we don't really know anything about anything in terms of what was going on. And it remains that way until there are 2 parallel movements at roughly the same time to re-evangelize, to bring Christianity back to Britain. Irish Christians, we sometimes talk about Celtic Christians, just means Irish. Irish Christians send missionaries who build an abbey on the island of Iona off the west coast of Scotland. That's in 543. And from there, Celtic Christianity extends across Scotland, starts coming down northeastern England. The abbey is founded at Lindisfarne, Holy Island. So all that is happening. And at the same time, pretty much, the Pope, Gregory, who has become rather enamored of the Angles. There's a story about a young man in a slave market and a totally fictional remark, not Angles, but angels. Let the reader understand. Gregory is very keen to get to Britain, but he gets elected Pope before he can make any plans, so he sends Augustine in 597, along with 40 other monks, missionaries, and they sail across the English Channel to the corner of southeast England, the county of Kent. They were meant to go and plonk themselves down in London, which was already the principal city, settlement, whatever, of the country. Augustine was a wimp, and after about half a day's walking, they settle themselves down where there are some very friendly people, and they're a bit tired, and that is why England's first cathedral is in Canterbury, not in London. It was supposed to be. Mellitus was the first bishop of London a few years later, and if you read the ecclesiastical history of the English people by the Venerable Bede, there's a wonderful bit in it where he recounts the Pope sending a letter, they didn't have email in those days, to Mellitus saying, and while you're there, work out what the hell's happened to that man Augustine. So Canterbury sort of was a mistake, but, you know, it took. In York, the story gets interesting in 627, when the pagan king of that kingdom, Deira, he's got it together with a Christian princess from Kent. She has come up for the nuptials, bringing with her a chaplain, a bishop by the name of Paulinus. And all is looking good for the wedding, except she has placed one condition on it, which is that the king will become a Christian. Now, I think there are parts of the South in this day where you may hear a bride-to-be saying, honey, we're only going to get married and you're only going to lay a finger on me if you give your life to Jesus. This maybe wasn't so much about personal faith, although it may well have been that as well. This is a political development, of course. If back then the king becomes a Christian, that has implications for the kingdom. It was a political statement, but it was a successful one. The king is happy to become a Christian, and so Bishop Paulinus must baptize him. Now, the way these missionaries that were going around, particularly the Celtic missionaries in the north, they'd get into a conversation with someone, let me talk to you about Jesus. And if the conversation was going well, they'd say, come with me, here's a river, living, fresh flowing water. Step into the river with me, I'll baptize you and send you on your way rejoicing. My theory about what happened in 627 was that Bishop Paulinus didn't quite have the nerve to look the king in the eye and say, great, your majesty, get your kit off and jump into the river. So instead they built a little wooden church. And in that little wooden church, on Easter Sunday, 627, Bishop Paulinus baptizes King Edwin and in so doing founds York Minster. So you'll realise we are getting ready for the mother of all celebrations and parties next year, which will be 1400 years of York Minster. York continues to grow in significance. Christianity takes and takes well, and they replace the little wooden church about which we know nothing at all except that it existed somewhere. They replace it with the stone cathedral, which stands there until the 11th century, and again, we know nothing at all about it, including its precise location. In 735, York has become so important that the Pope elevates the bishops of York to become archbishops, and they have remained archbishops of York to this day. So the English Church has the globally famous Archbishop of Canterbury and the lesser-known figure, but in charge of the northern province of the English Church, the Archbishop of York. Some of you will know from your own professional lives, not everybody finds it easy to occupy the second chair or to play second fiddle. Hang on to that for a moment or two. 866, the Vikings seize York, but they don't prescribe Christianity. It still continues to exist under the Viking rule. 1066, the Norman conquest. William takes the English throne at the Battle of Hastings. He is a hard man. He is not your cuddly, lovely, approachable monarch like King Charles today. And there's a big uprising against William the Conqueror in the north of England. He responds savagely in something that was called the Harrying of the North, 2 or 3 years of fighting, death, destruction. If we were using modern-day reporting terms, we'd certainly use words like genocide. Vast destruction and death. He regretted not a bit of it, save for one thing, we are told, which was the accidental destruction of the Saxon cathedral. And so the new Norman Archbishop of York that he has brought over, a man called Thomas of Bayeux, where the famous tapestry is housed, he oversees a very rapid construction of a brand new cathedral in the Norman style. If any of you have visited Durham Cathedral in the northeast of England, that's the greatest example of a Norman church in Britain. And he does it really quickly. In about 25 years, it was consecrated in 1100. And it would be standing to this day for sure, but for one man. In 1215, a new Archbishop of York called Walter de Grey is elected. And the story basically goes like this. He turns up to be enthroned as Archbishop at his cathedral, looks at it, sneers, and says, "That's smaller than the one in Canterbury. I'm not standing for that. I want a bigger one than the man in Canterbury's got. Build me a bigger cathedral." And this man was a mover, a shaker, an influencer, a networker, a politician, a fundraiser. And so it happens. Now, it didn't take 25 years. It took 250 years. But he was Archbishop for 40 years, and he saw the 2 transepts built. And the York Minster of today is the creation of this extraordinary, vain and jealous archbishop. So he was in post, as I say, for 40 years. He also had the genius of knowing that he needed a saint, because saints in your crypt bring pilgrims. He looked at Canterbury, which Canterbury houses the shrine of Becket. Durham was built as the shrine of St. Cuthbert, a beloved 7th century Celtic saint. He persuades the Pope to canonize a 12th century predecessor of his, William of York, now in our crypt. He had Canterbury envy in every shape or form. And he achieves it all. And those that come after him follow the vision and the dream. And it was July 3rd, 1472, that York Minster, as we know it, and as many of you have visited, was created. And here it is. But life happens, stuff happens. We had two very serious fires, only 11 years apart. In 1829, the east end of the cathedral, the choir and the Lady Chapel were devastated. You can see from that picture. In 1840, a candle left burning overnight, whoops, does pretty much the same for the western half of the cathedral. And out of this comes an opportunity for me just to remind you how living buildings in use change in ways which reflect us rather broken and fallen sinners that have to run these institutions. In the nave of York Minster, we have some wonderful roof bosses. You know, a roof boss is a carved wooden picture that is then painted. And down the center of the ceiling over the nave central aisle, there were a lovely series of medieval roof bosses, very predictably, depicting the life of Jesus from birth through to death, resurrection and ascension. And luckily, the Dean and Chapter had very good copies of these. So after the fire, they were able, and back then people wanted always to replace like for like, sort of. Because, now come on clicker, do your stuff. The second of the bosses depicted a lovely scene of Mary feeding the baby Jesus. But the 1840s was the beginning of the Victorian age. And I think you see where I may be going with this. They were nothing if not prudish. And the idea, the ceiling's 100 foot up. You can't make the detail out to the naked eye. These are just sort of blurs up there, even with glasses on. But the idea of creating a piece of art with a tiny bit of exposed female breast, unthinkable. So we have a picture of Mary giving Jesus a bottle. You know, if this was Sunday, April 1st, you'd sort of be believing it, wouldn't you? I mean, interestingly, it isn't just about prudishness. This is when the science of bottle feeding was coming into the world. If you were rich, powerful, upper class, you didn't breastfeed. Victoria had 9 children, and she hired wet nurses. She thought breastfeeding was for peasants and dirty and disgusting. So this is as much about sort of social standing. This is what you now did if you were rich and powerful. So we leave our mark in all sorts of ways. But York continues to be a vibrant, living church that honours the past and looks to the future. It was the seat of the first black archbishop in the English church, John Sentamu, who was archbishop for nearly 20 years until 2021. It was one of the first cathedrals to introduce girl choristers. And to this day, we have choral evensong 6 nights a week during term. And if you come on Tuesday, you will, let's say, hear the boys. If you come back on Wednesday, it'll be the girls. And on very, very big occasions, they sing together. We are a focal point for great occasions. That, as you might gather from all those red-clad figures in the picture, that's the consecration of a bishop. Not just any bishop in this instance, it was the consecration of the first woman bishop in the English church. We lag behind you guys painfully in all sorts of ways, so this was 20, 30 years later than many of us would have wanted, but it happened at last, and it happened in York Minster. We are beloved of the King. Every year the King holds a special service on the morning of Maundy Thursday, and Elizabeth, his mother, started the tradition that this would go around all the cathedrals within the realm. For his first services as sovereign, Charles chose York Minster. So you can see me there standing next to him with the Archbishop of York on my other side. We are a significant place. We are also a place of great music making. Another shot of our choir. We've got one of the best pipe organs in the country, and the standard of our music making is, we probably have the best professional back row of any cathedral outside London. And we are attempting to live for the future. That plan shows what we call our precinct. York wasn't monastic, so we don't have a proper enclosure like, say, Canterbury does. We don't have cloisters and such like. But we have a number of other significant buildings, and we are trying to make everything fit for purpose for the modern age. We've just built a brand new stone yard, which we've called the Centre of Excellence for Heritage and Craft Skills. The building itself won an architectural prize. It's sort of in my backyard. I've quite a big backyard. And every bit of stone on the Minster is hand finished. And we battle to preserve the stone. If any of you are climate change skeptics, come back to York with me and I will show you tangible proof of what happens when you get ever wetter winters, and of course the rain contains more and more nasty chemicals, and ever hotter summers. More of that in a minute. We've just put 199 solar panels on the southeast part of the roof, generating a vast, basically generating a third of the power that we need to run the cathedral. We jumped through a lot of hoops to do that, and if York Minster can do it, anyone can do it. We are trying to make all of our precinct sustainable. We have a lot of challenges. We've got probably the most important collection of manuscripts, artifacts, and books of any of the old cathedrals in England in a building that's near enough falling down, and we sort of need a museum space around it. That's one of our challenges. And we need to reorder our worship spaces and endow our choral music. I think you know all about the need for a music endowment, because these skills are precious and they don't come cheap. Good stuff often needs investment. But I'm going to finish just by mentioning one specific challenge. And if you want to get involved and help us in it, we would be very grateful. Our iconic rose window in the south transept is facing huge challenges. There was a fire that many of you may remember. It was July 1984, lightning struck the southeast corner of the south transept on a hot July night. Huge fire. For a couple of hours it looked as if it might engulf the whole cathedral. The skill of the firefighters stopped that being the case, but devastation in the south transept. Incredibly, the rose window didn't fall out, it wasn't destroyed, but the heat fractured it into 40,000 pieces. And it's quite a window. It was put in 1500, and it commemorates the Wars of the Roses. It's a combination of red and white roses. If you know your English history, you'll understand that. It's a symbol of the reconciliation and peace that came under Henry VII. It also has Marian overtones. And so this devastating fire, that's not a painting, of course, that's a press photograph. You can see just how dramatic it was, and you can see the impact. The window hit temperatures of 850 degrees. As I say, 40,000 cracks in it. And basically, to put this in layman's terms, and in this matter I'm a layman myself, our glaziers glued 40,000 cracks back together. But we're facing new challenges. Global warming is playing havoc with the south side of the cathedral, because it's the south side of the building that gets the heat of the day, and we're getting increasing amounts of ultraviolet and infrared radiation, which leads to much more rapid stone decay, damage of the paintwork, and failure of the adhesive keeping the window together. The summer temperatures frequently hit the 80s. Didn't you say that when you were in York it was over 100 one day?
I believe it was. We were there for the hottest day on record in York in the summer of 2020.
I rest my case. So we need to clean the window and repair the leadwork around all 73 of its panels, and we basically need to put an invisible protective shield between the window and the outside that will protect it from the radiation, the pollution, and the moisture. And we've got to get this done in 12 months, really. Total cost of the work is $1.9 million. We've received a lead gift from a British philanthropist of $750,000. There's a lot of myths about the English church. We get no support from the government at all. We get no support from lovely King Charles. We have a US 501c3, which kind of I lead, and I've been tasked to find $500,000 on this side of the Atlantic, knowing how great friendships there are across the Atlantic. There are opportunities to record generosity in the stone around the Minster, invisible to those on the ground, but visible near enough for eternity to God, most certainly. So I finish by asking, do you want to help us? Because we have to keep conquering. That little scheme shows you the red is the garrison, the blue, the Norman church, and then the grey, the great Gothic beast that is York Minster, the most common typo for the place, York Minster. And we need, I hope with your help, to keep conquering. So do come look at the webpage for the American Friends of York Minster. Grateful for your support, grateful to be with you this morning. I'm just going to have some water now, thank you, but the tea was the best tea I have had in the United States. it's the fact we are in there praying, and by and large, I and my team of clergy, there are 5 of us, we start work before almost anyone else in the institution each day, and we finish work. Certainly those who start work when we do have long gone home by the time choral evensong finishes at 6:30 in the evening. And we keep the place sanctified. And I think that's the only real answer I can give to the question of how we try and achieve it.
Well, it's a wonderful reminder of one of the core ministries that the church offers to the world. Both the centrality of prayer and worship, the offering of prayer, and that you said sanctified. This idea that part of our presence is to sanctify.
You're going to have to live with this. Because there weren't kind of riots about that. But he's also very clear about proclaiming the word of God as well. And it is that, of course, that gets him in trouble. But he's got no interest just in feeding the poor. He needs to feed the poor as a member of the body of Christ. We don't do any serious social justice work at York Minster. That is partly, York is an affluent town, and the need for a feeding ministry, as many Episcopal churches would understand it, isn't strong in the centre of York. And we are a professionalised organisation, mainly doing the one thing that we need to do most significantly, which is to welcome our tourist visitors and make sure that the place remains standing and can be a place where all sorts of people come to worship. And what is comforting about this, a few years ago we did some quite substantial qualitative market research about our sightseeing visitors, the people that roll up during the day, not for services, paying their £20 to come in and look round. And over 70% admitted that they were in some way, shall we say, touched by the building and its holiness. I mean, that building is capable of proclaiming things about the Christian faith in a more articulate manner than human beings are, quite often. So we take tourists and we turn them, we hope, into pilgrims. And I don't know where that goes, but that's only because the place is a sanctified, sacred space. And so it's an important part of our work. And I think I would want to say my interest in feeding the poor and in other expressions of support in one's community or globally or whatever it is, for me it has to come out of a faith which I enunciate and live out, because I'm quite sure that the rabbi in the synagogue down the road undertakes a similar concern for the neighbourhood and the community and the planet, but he ain't doing it because he's a follower of Jesus. And in the age in which we live, there are plenty of secular atheists, but people of good heart and good cheer, and they recognise that they have responsibilities to those less well off than they are. But they are most certainly not motivated by what motivates us. Was it? I can't remember which of the great Anglican divines wrote the hymn, "Who sweeps a room as for thy laws makes that and the action fine." It's George Herbert, I think, isn't it? In other words, we need to know what motivates us. And from that motivation, from that vocation, from that commissioning, from that hanging on to the word of God, we know what we are called to do. And we should be capable of saying why we do it as well as just delivering it.
As to what we do. You said something a moment ago, again, aware that this isn't as appreciated in the 21st century of the American church, that the building can say more about God than we often can. We often kind of lose sight of the fact that the edifice around us is part of our proclamation to the world. I wonder, in your experience, what does the building of York, this wonderful and glorious place, what does that proclaim to you?
Well, prior to my visit to Grosse Pointe, our single most generous donor in the United States is a Southern Baptist from Dallas, Texas, who has been giving to York for about 30 years. An elderly but very fit single man, travels a lot, an airline pilot, long retired now, and when he was a young man, he happened to visit York, walked around the corner, saw the cathedral, and it struck a chord with him. And I said to him, "You're not an Episcopalian. Why are you being so generous?" And his answer was sort of, "That building is a bastion of the Christian faith for me. You know, it is a rock on which the church stands, and, you know, clearly will stand." I mean, this is a man with a view of Christendom that probably in this room we wouldn't share. I think he is waiting for the whole world to be conquered in the name of Christ. And in a sense, he sees York as an icon of, you know, the endurance of the faith. Now, that wouldn't be my approach. But in that vast building, he sees something which speaks of the church enduring till the coming of Christ. We might find different inspiration and have a different theology to that. And as I say, it was only until this morning that he was our most generous donor in the United States. I hope you're listening. But the building and its history and its beauty, the images in its glass and in its stone, and the fact that 27 times a week minimum there are acts of worship, great and small, is inspirational for people in different ways, in the same way that the Spirit grabs each one of us differently. But it most certainly does that. And we see it day by day by day by day, hour, really.
Amen. I want to turn our attention for a final question away from the stone and perhaps a little away from York Minster, to something more personal and a place of overlap with Christ Church. You've already noted that music is a central part of your life at York Minster. You've certainly seen it's a critical part of our life. It's easy in a place such as this and a place such as York, I suspect, to think that music is just about, music. That it's just about pretty songs and glorious voices and a spectacular organ. But I know, and from you and our experience together, that something more can happen within the space of music than just musical quality and excellence. And I wonder, on a personal level, how does music enrich and expand your faith?
who knows some of my background, which is as a bewildered 12-year-old who'd recently changed schools, I was sort of dragooned from a completely unchurch-going background. I was dragooned into a church choir because it would be good for my musicianship. And it wasn't just my musicianship for which it proved to be good, if not salvific. One of the church fathers remarked that he or she who sings prays twice. And that's true for many of us, and very particularly within the Anglican Episcopal world, where it is little short of miraculous that somehow, through the turbulence of the Reformations in England, the choirs of England kept singing. And under Elizabeth's long reign, where she had to balance very adeptly demands both Protestant and Catholic that lead to the remarkable fusion and breadth of Anglicanism, it was remarkable that the choirs kept singing. And we have a particular charism. We are known by the sound of choral evensong. That is quintessentially the Anglican sound. Catholics don't do it, Lutherans don't do it. We have a particular gift. So I suspect there are many of us in this room who just know that their prayer and their worship is enhanced by the making of music. And I can't really explain it. I just know it's true. And it's not true for everyone, but it most certainly is true for many of us in the Anglican family.
Well, and you've just piqued my awareness in a really remarkable way to consider those not quite first choirs, but those choirs of the Reformation that managed to bring together Protestant and Catholic to lift their voice in prayer and song. I suspect it's true of your choir today, as it is true of our choir. We have Christians and non-Christians. We have Jews and agnostics, as well as Christians singing in our choir. The choir provides a space for the breadth of God's community to lift their voice in song and prayer still today. I mean, that's a remarkable thing that we are able to do in a church, that it is not just a place where Christians can pray, but where all can find their prayers lifted. Thank you for helping me to see that more brilliantly. I know it's about our time, and so I must take the preacher upstairs. So Dominic, I want to thank you again for this time, and I hope we will hear your invitation as well.